Chilla Art is a horror game studio run solely by two brothers, making some of the most horrifying Japanese retro-style horror games you'll ever play, and is taking the internet by storm. From solving the mysteries of a haunted house, to a ghostly presence lurking in your convenience store, to being a detective solving the haunting disappearances of missing children, to then being stalked while working at a coffee shop, or even having your life in danger while live streaming. All of these games absolutely terrify you to your core, and so in this video essay I'll be breaking down and analysing 5 of Chilla Art's most terrifying games from across their huge library, and explaining what makes them so amazing and so scary, and also how each game far surpasses the one before it. So sit back and get ready to explore the disturbing world of Chilla Art games. Also, pretty much all of these games contain some really disturbing themes and may be triggering, so just be warned. Anyway, let's start with one of their earliest games, Okaeri. Okaeri is Chilla Art's first game to ever release, and already we can see the start of their unique and terrifying style, as this game scared me so much to play. And whilst it is short, it provides an amazing horror experience and lays the foundations of aspects we see in later games that become staples of their horror style, and with it releasing all the way back in 2019 to a decent success. It begins by showing a haunting alleyway with the eerie sounds of crows, as you're then able to begin walking down it where your character says how she needs to get back home. And as you walk down the streets, there's a really ominous feeling with it being so dark and empty, as you navigate your way through, eventually reaching your house, which is just as creepy as everywhere else as you then enter. Your character calls out only to be met with no response, as you explore this unsettling abode with there being such an emptiness throughout as you explore the house. Yet every single door is locked and there's boxes everywhere. You see, in this game you play as a teenage girl who has just moved into a new house with her mother. But where is she? Well, you try to open one of the doors before then you hear the sound of the door opening downstairs. Nervous, you descend down with your character wondering if that could be her mother. Yet you enter the room only to be met with no one. Slightly freaked out, you explore the kitchen and living areas of the house with it feeling so empty and messy. And it feels like you're expecting something huge to happen until then you find a stray cat in the closet, which makes you even more weirded out because your character doesn't even seem to recognize it. And superstition, black cats are a really bad omen. After this, you explore more of the room where different items will give you different insights into the life of who you play as. Like how her mom isn't doing too well and their life right now doesn't seem to be that happy. Something evident in the empty rooms and distant eeriness we feel throughout. Suddenly, you hear aggressive banging coming from upstairs, and upon going up to investigate, this happens. It's now nighttime and everything is really dark, and you're now really frightened as to what could happen, and this is where things start to get really scary as the horror truly kicks in. This part of the game absolutely terrified me, as I just really didn't know what would happen, and the sudden switch from light to darkness really makes for a tense experience as you explore the house more, with it feeling so ominous, as you then learn the main mechanic of this part of the game, to gather the 5 numbers scattered around the house. But it's a horror game, so you know this can't be done without something horrifying happening, with most of that horror coming in the form of this house's tense atmosphere, where a large sense of dread looms over everything you do, as you navigate these rooms being dimly illuminated by your flashlight, until you then descend the stairs and for just a brief moment you can see what looks like a person moving. Could it be your mother? Anyway, you enter the kitchen, and the whole room is now flipped upside down and extremely dark, as you fear what could be hiding in here, and as you carefully navigate to find the rest of the numbers for the code until suddenly the sound of frantic rustling is heard nearby, only increasing the feeling of dread over what could happen. Now the rest of the game basically involves you navigating through the house to find all of the numbers hidden amongst it, whilst also finding hints as to what order the numbers go in. And as you go to head back upstairs, you see papers scattered on the floor. Who could have done this? Could it be the ghost-like creature that we saw earlier? Anyway, you then can finally enter the code into the locked box, which reveals a bank statement of your mother being in serious debt. You're left in confusion as to what this means until suddenly you hear a loud bang from downstairs. Horrified, you slowly walk down to see the door to one of the locked rooms now burst open. Panicked, you enter only to see your mother who had taken her own life. This moment is just honestly so shocking, as the earlier points of horror in this game leads you to believe that this would be some big supernatural event, or a big haunted ghost house as a means of distracting you from stuff like how her mother's not been feeling well, or how they're in a poor financial situation, which makes this moment of uncovering her body all the more harrowing, as it takes you from supernatural horror to shocking and grounded realism that's just so disturbing and hard to play through, and is genuinely one of the most effective moments I've ever seen in a horror game. However, that's not where this game ends, as in an extremely devastated frame of mind, your character reads her mother's note and it then cuts to 4 hours later. You're now in a grainy and dark forest alone in the dead of night, with the atmosphere feeling so creepy and tense as you nervously look around to see if there's anything lurking out there, as you trudge through the dark forest with the panicked breathing of your character now gone, now replaced with the stoic footsteps plunging deeper into the forest, until eventually you reach a shrine in the forest which is just as alone as you are. As you then enter and see a chair and a rope, you look upon it in horror, yet your only option is to give in, and so you do. It ends with the sound of the rope creaking amongst the nature, and that is Okaeri. What makes this game so unique is how it perfectly shows Chilla Art's amazing ability to turn relatively mundane locations or concepts and distort them into deeply horrifying experiences. And on the surface, the idea of a horror game contained to one small house sounds quite boring, but in practice it becomes one of the most tense short horror games I've ever played, and had me extremely freaked out whilst playing it due to how it slowly builds those feelings of dread. From the loud noises you hear to the doors opening mysteriously, and how it keeps you alone for most of the game yet you know someone else is here, due to the strange things happening beyond your control. And it creates for an extremely unsettling experience. And for Chilla Art's first ever game, it's an incredible horror experience. We also see the beginnings of aspects of their game design that would go on to become staples of later games, like how their games don't shy away from covering dark or sensitive subject matter, and instead handling it with the weight it needs to both raise awareness to these issues while still making for a scary experience. Another aspect of Chilla Art's game design is its retro and VHS horror aesthetic, with its PS1 style graphics extremely reminiscent of the work of PuppetCombo, who popularised the retro horror genre, and with later Chilla Art games also being reminiscent of the first Fathom series. With a game of theirs I feel captures all of this the best being one of their next games, The Convenience Store, with the games after this being way better and way scarier and some of the best horror games I've ever played. The Convenience Store is one of Chilla Art's next games to gain massive popularity online, and skyrocketed the studio into well-regarded success after being played by many Let's Players, with so many people resonating with its unique style of horror and mystery, where over the course of multiple days you piece together the cryptic story of what's happening to your town and convenience store. And this is the game where we see Chilla Art really begin to show what they're capable of in terms of really captivating horror, with some even arguing that this is one of their best games that they've made, and with this also being one of the few Chilla Art games to actually get its own film adaptation, which just looks amazing. It opens with a view of the store that you'll become uncomfortably familiar with over the course of the game, as you then load into the game properly, where it begins with you waking up for work, yet it's night time. Of course you're working a night shift, what else would you expect from a horror game? Wait, hang on a minute. A retro indie horror game that takes place in a small store late at night which also got its own film adaptation? Where have I seen this before? Anyway, you begin to explore your character's small apartment and get familiar with this living space, with it feeling really claustrophobic and eerie, and from the window you can just make out what looks like the glow of the store that you'll spend so much time scared of. But before leaving to start your shift, you first grab a flashlight, change your clothes and eat some food, and all the while a real eeriness begins to grow, but eventually you finish your chores and head out into the night. It's a dark and moody blue night, and you wander out of your apartment and into what has to be one of the strangest places I've seen in a horror game. The streets lay empty and dark, with everything having a real uncanniness to it, with it stretching on far, being faintly illuminated by stray street lamps. And as you wander more and more, you fear that something could be watching you, and so you look around with your guard up to ensure that nothing is around, but the only thing scarier than seeing something is seeing nothing at all, as the emptiness of this town makes you really unsettled, and whilst playing this I found myself really uncomfortable. Anyway, you eventually make it across the town without anything happening, with you then approaching the convenience store, with its blue hum of light standing against the darkness of night as you enter and speak to your boss. He's glad you made it, and tells you that he just heard someone had fallen off the same bridge we just walked across, and that apparently someone saw a man walking with his legs bent the other way, before he then plays it off as a joke. After this you then explore the rest of the store, a place that may look peaceful now, but trust me, it won't be like that for very long. You familiarise yourself with places like the shelves, the bathroom and the storage room until then you head to the back of the store. All the comfort from the store fades away as you see the start of an alleyway blocked off by police tape and signs, and with a really ominous feeling coming from it, and with this whole back area just feeling so unnerving. Anyway, you then re-enter the store and begin your shift by punching in. This sure seems familiar to something I've played before. After punching in, your boss leaves you here all alone, and instantly there's a really uncomfortable feeling as you see in the office a computer that allows you to watch the whole store and the security cameras. I wonder if this will be relevant later. Anyway, each night that you spend here there's at least one chore you have to do before returning home, with tonight's chore being to get rid of the expired food. And so you do, with it being so creepy due to you going outside right next to where the ominous alleyway is. Now the first night is pretty uneventful, with the occasional customer entering to which you can help them, but besides that nothing much goes on. Or at least that would be what I'd say if it wasn't for this. The sliding doors seem to be opening by themselves as though they're detecting someone walking through, although no one's there. Could this be a ghost? Slightly freaked out, you continue the rest of your shift, until suddenly a delivery driver enters holding a strange package. But even stranger is how the package is addressed to you, and so you take it home. You're now at home, and you see that the contents of the package is actually a VHS tape, and so you play it. It's quite short and blurry, but from it you can make out what looks like the exact same tape and signs as in the alley behind the store. And the graininess and general sinisterness of it makes it really perturbing to watch, and you're now extremely creeped out. Who sent you this package? How did they know your name? Why would they send it to the store and not your apartment? And worst of all, what horrors could be lurking behind that tape? All of these questions linger in your head as you then exit your apartment and into the first night. What makes the intro to this game so unsettling is how it has that gentle build-up of paranoia. From the beginning in the house, while it may seem somewhat safe, the general lack of sound or comforting atmosphere already gives the sense that something about this place is off, which is only then heavily reinforced later as you exit into the town, where this walk to the store is absolutely petrifying on a first playthrough, and gives a similar feeling to the introduction of Okaeri. In an interview I found with the brothers behind this game, they said this about finding ideas for their games. There's also something eerie about Japanese scenery. Public telephones, tunnels, subway platforms, and so on. And I think this fascination with Japanese scenery and using it for horror is something we not only see extensively throughout this game, but also throughout their later games that I'll be covering in this video. Then in the story, you have stuff like the cameras and alleyway foreshadowing that at some point they're going to be horrifyingly relevant, and building up that sense of paranoia which all of Chilla's Art games do so well. But to know what nightmares these things are foreshadowing, we'll have to dive into the next night of the game. You exit your house into the night once again, yet this time it's much darker than before, with all of the street lamps being turned off, which somehow makes your walk back to the store even more tense, nervous of what might happen. Eventually though, you make it back to the convenience store, which just so happens to be in the most inconvenient part of town, being the furthest thing away from your house. Anyway, you talk to your boss about the doors from yesterday, where he blames it on the faulty wiring, yet your character thinks it to be a poltergeist, to which he says, "Ghosts aren't real." However, before punching in, you check the back of the store to see all the dumpsters from yesterday are now completely flipped over, leaving you unsettled before you then punch in and start your shift, and your boss leaves you alone at the store once again. But lucky for you, tonight's chore is exterminating a bunch of rats outside. Great. And so you do, but the whole time you feel as though you're being watched, as you're uncomfortably close to the creepy alleyway. But these rats are just so fucking hard to deal with, and they're so small, and it's so hard to find. I'm just so fucking stressed out of this job. Anyway, you head back inside and meet probably the rudest customer in this game, who demands that you get the items from the shelves for him. And worst of all, unlike later Chilla's Art games, you're only allowed to carry one item at a time, so giving him everything he needs is grueling. Eventually though, he gets his beer and you get some relief, where you just wait around doing nothing, where you eventually walk around the store until suddenly the grandma who was just in the store earlier somehow just didn't leave for a while, and this scared me for some reason. However, the most sinister part of this encounter is speaking to her where she asks where Ken-kun is, after thinking she heard his voice before she then says that this was her daughter's house, and then shouting, "What did you do? How dare you?" And then she just waddles off like nothing happened. Extremely unnerved, you return to the cameras until suddenly you see for a brief moment what looks like a kid running up to the door to set it off. Could that be what's been going on this whole time? Anyway, shortly after this, the delivery driver appears yet again, asking to pick up a package. Yeah, there's no package, right? Yet when you check the office, somehow there is one, which you then hand over to him as he leaves into the night. And that is the end of night 1. The next night begins the exact same as all the others that came before it, except for the fact that thankfully there's no creepy tape. Yeah, it happens to be raining, and so you take your umbrella with you, but then you open the door and see a package addressed to you. Horrified, you take it back to your room and watch it, as it shows some random house, but nonetheless it's still incredibly ominous, and a sign of the horrors that you're about to endure. But the most disturbing part about this is that whatever person is behind the tapes not only knows your name and where you work, but now they know your home and where you live, and this makes the rest of the game far more horrifying. You leave your house and it's raining, and so once again you undergo the tense and eerie walk to the convenience store, and I think it's a really cool detail how the weather and atmosphere changes each night, with the rain adding an even more unsettling ambience as for once it's not as quiet. Yet from here the horror only builds as you enter the store, only for your boss to be nowhere to be found, and so you check the back. After getting jump scared by your boss, he agrees to stop trying to scare you so much, until you then tell him about the VHS tapes where he plays it off as just a prank. But this is a horror game, you know it can never be that simple. Anyway, he's pretty dismissive of all your concerns as you then punch in and begin your shift with him leaving into the night once again. Already there's something that feels so off about your shift. Maybe it's the fact that the tapes has now shown up at your house, or the fact that your boss is about as empathetic as a pile of dust, but you just can't shake the feeling that you're about to uncover something terrible. But there's no time to think about that, as tonight's task is stocking the shelves. And so you go about your business trying to restock until suddenly you're completely locked into the storage room. You frantically try to get out, but you can't, as you then hear the sound of someone entering the store. Fear consumes you as it finally unlocks, and you step out only to see that there's no one there. Or at least there would be no one there if it wasn't for an engineer coming to fix the air conditioner under your boss's orders. Anyway, creeped out, you continue stocking the shelves before you then check the cameras out of curiosity, where you look at the back of the store and see that all of the tape has been ripped apart. In sheer horror, you realise that that's where the engineer is headed, and whatever horrors are behind it are now ready to come out. And upon exiting the cameras and looking at them again, you see that the engineer is now nowhere to be seen. Terrified, you exit the cameras and make your way to the back of the store, and anxiously enter the alleyway where you see a small shed with a locked door and no way to open it, until you then find the wrench of the engineer, which allows you to get a small key from the vent, and so you unlock the door. However, when you try to open it, it feels as though a ghostly presence is holding you back, and so you fearfully return to the store, and from here things only get scarier. It's now later into the night and things are pretty uneventful, until you notice that the toilet in the bathroom is going crazy, and so you investigate it, where suddenly you're locked in the bathroom just like the storage room before, although this time it feels even more sinister due to how the toilet seems to be moving by itself, and how you can hear the doors opening. However, eventually you're set free and see that a bunch of items have been knocked off the shelves, and the door is acting faulty again, and so scared you check the cameras, where then a ghost appears on the camera, and in sheer horror you leave your office to check the store and see that it had left something behind. And so you investigate, only to get a small piece of paper, with this moment being so disturbing as you realise that you're no longer safe anymore. However, after waiting for a while, nothing really happens, until you remember the shed from earlier and decide to go to it again. As you approach it, you get a really unsettling feeling until you then open the door, where you see the corpse of your boss alongside a TV, and worse yet is that the door locks behind you, making you trapped with this body. Panic consumes you as you fear what might happen in here, with it being so disturbingly petrifying as you hear the most horrific sounds of struggle and violence until suddenly you see the head of your boss begin to move as it glares at you, following you around the room no matter how much you move before then. And that is the end of night 2. What makes this section of the game so terrifying is how you have that slow build-up of fear and not knowing what threat might be out there. Each small aspect is intentionally placed to unsettle you over the course of the game, making that moment towards the end even more impactful, as stuff like the tense walk to the store or the constant VHS tapes or even the jump scare by your boss is all building up that paranoia and dread in you, which makes the rest of the horror hit all the more harder. But the horror is far from over, as there is still more frightening ghouls lurking amongst the shadows as you enter the third and final night of the game. It begins just like every other night that came before it, with it beginning with you watching a tape that's already in your apartment, and so you watch it. This time you see a weird recording of the shed from behind the store from the ground. After this you look around your apartment with your character thinking last night was a dream, which would explain all of the absolutely insane shit that happened, but you still can't shake that feeling of immense disturbing fear you felt so palpably in the shed. And so, with nothing else waiting for you, you leave your apartment and venture into the night. For this night's gimmick, there actually isn't one. Just a dark and dreary silent night, and the very fact that nothing special happens makes it all the more frightening, as you have no idea what could be lurking for you in the town. Over each night you walk through the town expecting something to happen on your walk to the store alongside each night's various gimmicks, with there being the dread that the ghost that's been stalking you would do something on the walk, but there's nothing. And so this final walk to the store does an excellent job in building that last bit of paranoia before you enter the most horrifying part of this game. You enter the store and your boss is nowhere to be found, confirming your suspicion that last night wasn't a dream, and so you head to the back and punch in for the night, as you then leave the counter. Suddenly you're in a strange hellscape version of the store, filled with TVs that you can turn on only to be filled with static, with this feeling so sinister as you're now presumably in the same world as where the ghost tormenting you is from, and it could attack you at any moment. And so you head to the back and carefully watch the cameras, where you notice a strange young boy walking around the store, only to methodically inspect specific TVs in the store, yet the whole time the most horrendous sounds played, leaving you insanely freaked out. Now this puzzle is just really annoying because it's so hard to see where he's looking at, and if you get enough of them wrong it resets, so it just made it really annoying to play through. But after quickly completing the puzzle with no trouble whatsoever, you enter the back of the store and see the same kid now crying in pain in the corner, and so you go to help them, where then the same ghost appears, leaving you stunned and scared, with the store now going back to normal as you then head back into the store, only to see one last tape left outside, and so you take it. You're now back in your apartment with only two options: send the tape away or watch it yourself. But at this point you've come so far and been through so much, from watching your boss die to being tormented by a ghost, and so you decide to watch this last tape. You watch in horror as you realise that this is a recording of you sleeping in your bed, shot from just outside the window. This monster is now after you. It cuts to you now laying in bed as you notice a silhouette in the door, whilst also feeling as though you can't move, exactly like how you couldn't open the door earlier on in the game, with there being the sound of horrendous screams playing in the background until then. And that is the convenience store. Or at least just one ending for it, with the other one basically explaining that the whole reason for the ghost was due to a homicide of a family occurring on the property near to the store, with these ghosts being a manifestation of that lingering torment and anguish. Upon knowing these details, like the ghosts and constant creepy occurrences, they now make sense and greatly show how there's always a really deep and well thought out story at the heart of every Chilla Art game, as once you know this, every loose end begins to fall into place. But what makes this game so scary is how it manages to slowly build that horror across the various nights, and using the gradual rise and things to unsettle you to make for a really tense experience. And honestly, one of the scariest moments across these games for me has been that anxiety-riddled walk to the convenience store on that last night, with the safety net of your boss now gone due to his death, making you feel so vulnerable, and the fact that it's the last night makes you fear that something terrible might happen on your walk, yet the very absence of anything scary is what makes it so scary, as it leaves that dread unresolved, making the rest of the night far more intense. Now there is one other aspect of this game that adds to the horror of it, but I'll talk more about that later on as it relates more to the last two games I'll be covering. Although I have to say the most horrifying part of this game is how it places you in the shoes of a severely overworked night shift employee. And if I have to hear that god-awful store music one more time, I'll kill my boss before the store— oh, fuck. Personally, I feel the supernatural elements were really well crafted, and compared to Okaeri, we can see a massive increase in scope and production value, with the graphics being far more detailed while still maintaining that retro VHS quality. And instead of being limited to just a house, it utilises a variety of distinct and disturbing locations to make each moment of horror stand out. Yet just like Okaeri, we can see that at the very core of this game is a story so deep-rooted in tragedy, yet expressed through horror gameplay elements. And I think this is part of the reason this game became a cult classic Chilla Art game, and why it was also later adapted into a film, with it also laying the groundwork of elements that games afterwards build upon massively, with one game in particular after this one being one of the most emotional and scary stories I've ever seen in a horror game, with that being the game Missing Children. Also, if you've enjoyed this so far, why not subscribe, since it helps me out a lot and makes huge projects like these worth it. And if you like these games, you're bound to like my other stuff too. Anyway, enjoy the rest. Now originally I intended for this section to be much longer due to the fact that this game really marks a turning point in the design of Chilla Art games, from otherworldly horror to deeply real and haunting narratives that could happen in real life. And I realise it's actually quite a short and mostly uneventful game that's quite repetitive. However, it is one of their most unique games and lays groundwork for some of Chilla Art's best games that I'll be covering later, with it releasing just shortly after the convenience store in June of 2020, and is one of the scariest yet also most heartbreaking horror games I've ever played. In the game you play as a detective investigating the disappearances of 3 missing children, where you're tasked with navigating a small Japanese suburb with background music that sounds oddly familiar. Whilst also solving haunting puzzles to eventually find out why they went missing and where they might be. Over the course of the game you go through numerous chilling occurrences like phones mysteriously ringing or lights going out, or strange, creepy and liminal environments that feel so weird to be in, or the recurring hauntings of a radio that can be found in the houses of the 3 missing children, that play strange sounds of screaming or distress that leave you worried of what fate might have fallen upon them. And over the course of the game you also have other strange occurrences like strange ghostly grandmas and dogs with human faces. And as you piece together more of the mystery, you believe there to be this big spooky conspiracy of them being kidnapped by a strange ghostly force who talks at radios, leading you to the end of the game where you go to a park due to that being the place they decided to meet. It's dark and gloomy with a really ominous and foreboding feeling as though something terrible is about to happen, as you approach the play area where then you see what looks like a ghost stood atop the play area with the sounds of static and crying playing once again, and this moment is just so terrifying as you walk through with this figure continuously watching you until then you see a shadowy girl running through the park, and so you follow her down the street only for her to run off into the wilderness, with you being unable to follow her. But what makes this moment even more horrifying is how you still haven't found the 3 girls, and whatever ghostly forces lurking here may have already gotten to them, and you could be next. After this you make your way to a creepy set of docks with the sounds of screaming playing as you approach further, before then you reach the end of the pier and see shoes and some rope. You see, also throughout the game you investigate the lives of these kids, and you learn really heartbreaking things about them, like a mother who wants to break up her daughter's relationship, one who's neglected and left alone and starving, and one who's subjected to their parents drunk and arguing. And in this moment you realise that there was no big grand ghostly conspiracy, but instead 3 girls who wanted to escape the pain of their lives. And this moment captures so well Chilla Art's amazing storytelling abilities, as it subverts your expectations of it being a supernatural horror game, as whilst there is that monster at the end, it's likely just a manifestation of the guilt of our character, of them not being able to save them in time, as in reality this story has been one that's grounded in reality and real tragedy, and is something we see in later Chilla Art games. Also, don't worry, as there is a good ending where you do manage to make it in time to save them, and their lives improve a lot after this due to the help of the detective. Now, compared to Okaeri in the convenience store, we can again see Chilla Art's technique of using supernatural horror elements as a way to convey a real and tragic story, like in Okaeri where the ghostly horror is meant to represent her mother's struggles and eventual death, and in the convenience store the ghosts are meant to represent the lingering anguish after the murder of a family, and missing children is no different in this for reasons I've already mentioned. But it also marks a turning point in Chilla Art game design, with them being less reliant on supernatural elements to convey their horror, instead using real world issues and fears to make something scary, and by having their horror so grounded in our world and reality it makes it all the more terrifying as it suggests that this could happen to you too, with a game that perfectly shows this being one of their next games after this, The Closing Shift. Also, I know I pretty much brushed over this game, but the gameplay was really repetitive and I felt that I could shorten it down to this to give me more time to go deeper into their better games after this. The Closing Shift is one of Chilla Art's most infamous games, and is probably the one you've heard of them from, with it releasing in March of 2022, and with it widely being considered one of the greatest and most scariest games yet, due to how effectively it simulates real-world issues through the lens of a horror game, and it's honestly one of the most visceral and horrifying gaming experiences I've ever had, with this game not relying off the paranormal for its horror, by instead making the threat far more real, and is personally my favourite Chilla Art game, wherein it involves you playing as a girl working at a coffee shop, and whilst it sounds simple in concept, it's one of the scariest games I've ever played. Also, this and the games afterward heavily feature themes of stalking and assault, and may potentially be triggering to some viewers, so please keep that in mind. It opens with you in your apartment running late for work, with the apartment itself being very small and confined, with a cute little chinchilla plush on the table and a closet that a large person could easily fit in. Anyway, these types of apartments are extremely common in Japan for students and young people, and so already we can tell that we play as someone who lives alone, which already makes you feel far more vulnerable as you know it's a horror game. Anyway, you leave your apartment only to be met with the view of giant imposing buildings in every direction, yet despite that there's a huge feeling of emptiness as you make your way down to the bottom of the stairs. Until then, you hear a song playing faintly, and upon going down further you find someone's phone left on the floor. However, upon looking around there's no other people around who could have had this phone, with this making for a really strange and creepy opening to the game, as you're in a place so filled with life due to being nearby to multiple giant apartment blocks, yet also somehow so deeply lonely as there's no one around you. Or at least that would be the case if it wasn't for there being one other person here, being crouched down on the floor looking for something, where he then takes the phone from you and just stares at you uncomfortably, as you then drive off to begin your closing shift. This is Chilla's Coffee, a place you're going to become intimately familiar with over the course of the game, and is the place where some of the game's most fun yet also most petrifying moments will take place. But more importantly is the cute little mascot of the chinchilla, something that the creators of the game are a fan of, even naming Chilla Art after chinchillas because they're just so adorable. Anyway, you enter the store and then head to the back to speak to your boss. He scolds you for being late and then also for messing up orders, and to leave your phone in the locker during work hours before he then leaves and drive off, where you're now completely alone. From here you begin to learn the main gameplay mechanic of the game, where you need to master being able to make drinks that are hot, cold, and preparing food, whilst also navigating a complex amount of systems to ensure not to mess up the order as your shift then begins. Now, to be honest, when I first played this game I failed absolutely miserably on the first customer, as whilst the tutorials like the videos and the whiteboard do give you tips on how to make the coffee, I still spent about 10 minutes figuring out how to pour the milk the right way. However, I do feel that the food service mechanic and gameplay loop is really fun and addictive, as once you master it you can make each order as efficiently as possible, and having really fun gameplay really contrasts with the horror elements later on. Whilst making your first order though, you notice something in your kitchen, a security monitor allowing you to watch the drive-thru just outside the store. I'm sure this couldn't possibly be relevant later, right? Anyway, you then serve the first customer, where he then leaves as you're left uncomfortably alone. And I think a great strength of this game is how well it uses loneliness for horror. However, I'll talk more about that later. After this, another customer then enters saying, "Did you hear on the news? I hear stalker cases are on the rise," and says how scary it is and how she needs to be careful, and that we also need to be careful too. I wonder what this could be foreshadowing. Anyway, you then make her order where she sits down to drink it. However, in between this, you check the back storage room and notice a strange locked door with a strange aura coming from it. And I think already we can see lots of parallels to their other game, The Convenience Store, as the general premise is very similar of a girl working alone at night with a boss who's an asshole, while various customers visit saying spooky things that make you more unsettled alongside a creepy area at the back of the store that you're unable to access for now. And despite being so similar, they both vastly differ in horror, with this game far surpassing that of The Convenience Store. But I'll have to talk about more of this game to talk about that. As the night continues, you get visited by a group of schoolboys, but stranger yet is how one of them notices a noise in the distance, yet no one thinks anything of it. And the rest of the encounter is pretty uneventful, with another customer then entering, and after giving him his coffee, he speaks to you, saying that he's a private investigator and saying that there's been numerous reports of people getting harassed, and to call him if anything ever happens, and also recommends closing the store early to avoid trouble. And just like what the woman said earlier about stalking, it starts to build up a subtle amount of dread of whether someone could be after you as well. And that, alongside all the giant windows in the store, creates such an intense feeling as though you're being watched. It's now the end of your shift, and the entire tone switches massively with the cheery music on the store radio now cutting out completely, as that feeling of emptiness creeps back in whilst you sweep all the floors of the store. And doing this builds up such a great feeling of unease, as now the store is closed and you're completely by yourself, and so if anything bad were to happen, no one would be able to help you. And that paranoia continues until suddenly all of the power cuts out, leaving you in total darkness, and so you nervously make your way back into the store and eventually power the breaker again. But even weirder is that there's a carton of spilt milk just next to it that wasn't there before, with more being found throughout the back room, with you fearing where this might have come from and what it may have to do with the lights going out and the strange locked door. Anyway, you then replace the milk and enter the next night of the game. What makes this first night so unsettling is how it slowly builds up all of that paranoia. The emptiness at the start and the creepy guy you meet builds a sense of unease which is only built upon throughout the various creepy interactions over the course of the night, where the establishment of the idea of people being stalked and harassed creates a strong feeling of vulnerability, as we could be targeted next. And that dread and paranoia culminates at the end of the night with the lights turning off. And whilst nothing explicitly bad comes from this, with this being able to be played off as faulty wiring, there's still a lingering feeling that something horrible is lurking amongst the coffee shop. The second night begins the same, with you waking up and leaving your apartment to start your shift, with this night being windy and cold just like the one before, yet this time there's no lost phone and it's pretty uneventful, except for when you go to the car park this time you notice a van parked on the opposite side, yet it's also empty before you then head to work. You enter and speak to your boss, who scolds you again for being late and refusing to accept your apologies before he then leaves as you're once again alone and your shift begins. The first customer is pretty quiet as he orders and then stands silently as you prepare his drink and food, yet after doing so he reveals himself as a foreigner who's been living in Japan for more than 15 years, as he then says something isn't right about this place, saying,
"Maybe because of that guy over there."
But when he looks, there's no one there, as he says it must have been his imagination and asks if you're haunted. Oh god, not again! Anyway, he then quickly leaves, with your next customer being even creepier, as you see him approach from the side of the store as he stares at you walking all the way along the outside and into the building, and then ordering without saying a thing. And once giving him his order, he sits down in the far corner of the shop just out of view of you. Although in my footage I couldn't get this as clear because I was so locked in on making the drinks. The next customer immediately calls you cute and asks for your number whilst the creepy guy leaves the store. The amount of secondhand embarrassment that comes from seeing the dialogue of the guy ordering is enough to paralyze someone, as his flirting is really awkward and uncomfortable to read, with his persistence turning from embarrassing to now worrying as he asks for your phone number. And so you give him a fake phone number and then make his order, where after giving it to him he sits at the closest table to you, and the whole interaction with him just feels so uncomfortable to play through, as he then stands up and stares at you before he then leaves. Could he be one of the stalkers that people have been talking about? And that's the end of your shift. Tonight you're tasked with clearing up all of the trash left on the tables, yet as you do, you notice a strange van slowly circling around the parking lot of the coffee shop, as though they are watching you. Anyway, after circling the parking lot slowly, the van then leaves and drives off, and so you head outside and put the trash bags in the dumpster, and then you start to clear the tables, yet on one of them you notice something, a photo that had been left behind of you working at the counter in the coffee shop, taken from just outside the window, with this photo being in the exact same place that the creepy guy from earlier was sitting, with this moment being of such pure and absolute horror as you realise that you're now being stalked, and that combined with the van lingering outside gives a sense that no one can be trusted and that someone is watching you. Could this be what the other customers reported seeing, like the man that swore he could see someone, or the schoolboy that noticed something strange? Anyway, from here things are going to get even more disturbing as you enter the third night. A huge strength of this game's horror is how it utilizes the idea of a Chekhov's gun. Chekhov's gun is an idea in writing fiction where a key element of the story should be established early on, and should be of significance later on in the story. For example, a gun being established in the first act of a play must be fired at some point later on. So how does this relate to this game? Well, in the first night of the game we have so many things established to us, like the threat of stalking, the help from the private investigator, the locked door and the security camera, alongside many others. And since we know it's a horror game, we know that at some point all of these aspects of the game will have to be important, making it far scarier than if those elements weren't established prior. Then the threat of stalking is established almost as soon as the game starts, and so you already have that subtle amount of paranoia planted in you that you could be stalked. And over the multiple creepy interactions with customers, you fear that any of them could stalk you, which is what makes that payoff of seeing the photo on the table so terrifying, as you now have a reason to be scared as you're now being stalked, as you fear what might happen on your next shift. The third night starts the exact same as all the others, where you leave your apartment and once again descend the stairs down the apartment to head to your car until a woman with a stroller comes flying out of nowhere who's angry at you for some reason. And whilst this jump scare is cheap, I'm not afraid to admit it did spook me a bit. Already unsettled, you head to your car and once again there's the same van parked in the same spot until you realise something horrifying. This van looks exactly like the same van that was lingering outside the coffee shop on the last night, meaning that whoever the stalker is now knows where your apartment is, and with this disturbing realisation staying with you as you head to the store. And sure enough, a cutscene plays from the perspective of the van watching you drive off, confirming all of your paranoia, and from here things only get even scarier. You speak to your boss about weird customers and he says to just brush it off and focus on your work, as you then say you're worried about being stalked, where he laughs and finds it hard to believe about anyone being interested in you. Yet he still offers to help you, but it's in a sarcastic way as he then leaves once again. What makes this even sadder and more horrible is that this experience of people not believing cases of stalking is something that happens too often in the real world, where often action is only taken after it's far too late and serious harm has already happened. And I think that it's good that Chilla's Art doesn't shy away from showing that in this game. However, I'll talk more about that later. You then begin your shift with your first customers being a group of girls who shames one of their friends for ordering lots of food, as you then prepare their order with a photo of you still being in your inventory acting as a constant reminder that you're being stalked. You then complete their order and give them the food and drinks, yet you then see a strange man approach the store and enter. Yet instead of ordering at the counter, he just stares at the shelves as another customer also enters, yet he's not able to afford a coffee with the other customer pitching in to help pay for it, challenging your earlier assumptions of his bad intentions, showing how the game plays with your paranoia to make every customer seem like a threat, as you don't know who's stalking you, with him also asking you if you've seen any ghosts recently. However, in the background this whole time you can also see the conversation with the group of girls, where they talk about a creepy man on the bus who stared at them breathing loudly, and how he may have done harm to them if they didn't get off at the right bus stop, where they then talk about whether they should report it to the police, with this playing into your paranoia as it shows how widespread stalking is in this place, as you wonder if it could be the same person who's stalking you. Anyway, you complete their orders and that's it for your shift, with your only task for closing being to bust the tables. However, before that you enter the back, where you see that the door to the back room is open, yet when you look outside no one's there, and the strange room is still locked, as you fear who could have opened it. You then start busting the tables, and as you do it begins to snow, which is actually kinda nice to see as you then finish clearing the tables. You hear the strange sound of mechanic whirring, and so confused you check the camera. You watch in horror as you see a man standing there in the drive-thru, staring directly at the camera with you being filled with immense fear, as you're completely alone and so no one is there to save you, and so nervously you head out to confront him. Yet when you do, he's gone, with all that's left behind being a note on the drive-thru screen where he seems infatuated with your character, and had met her at Chilla's Coffee and saying how she makes his heart pound and he never felt like that before, with this note being so sinister and unsettling, as the stalker seems derangedly obsessed with you and very unstable, as you fear what he could do next, as you then enter the next night. While short, this night is extremely nerve-wracking and builds upon the horror established in the previous two nights paramountly, to make that climax of seeing the stalker in the camera all the more scary, and the confirmation of the van outside your apartment being the same as the one outside the store makes it all so much more perturbing, with places like inside your apartment and working your shift at the store being mostly uneventful and not scary outside of some dialogue, and there's an element of safety you feel whilst making the coffee and whilst in your apartment, as you know that it's unlikely for something to happen. Yet then parts like just after your shift or leaving your apartment to go to your car, there's a strong sense of unease as the tone switches from safety to fear, as you feel so alone and exposed, and so by balancing places of comfort and places of fear, it amplifies each part of it so much more, as leaving that comfort is extremely stressful. But also what's even more unsettling is when you see something scary in a place you once thought was a place of safety, and by challenging that idea it makes the game far more tense, with all of these horror techniques only being used more and more as we enter the next night of the game. The fourth shift opens not with you waking up, but instead from the perspective of the stalker, where you see multiple photos of your character alongside milk and a coffee cup, only showing how deranged your stalker really is and the threat that you're up against. Suddenly the doorbell rings, so you investigate and find a note, presumably from the stalker, where he says he knows her best, and you learn in this that he's the same person as the guy at the start who lost his phone, and saying how he believes that your character feels the exact same way he does, and that they're in love and today is their anniversary. With this letter being so horrifying, as not only does it prove that he knows where you live, but also suggesting that his obsession with stalking you had gone on far longer than the beginning of the game, and his delusion in believing they're in a relationship makes you fear how unstable he really is and what he might do. You then leave your apartment where it's snowing, and you see the entire city covered in a gentle blanket of snow, and despite being stalked in a state of panic, this moment is actually quite peaceful and oddly beautiful and serene as you descend your way to your car, yet when you try to use it, it doesn't start, forcing you to take the bus. And whilst it's not uncommon for cold weather to make cars play up, you worry whether the stalker might have anything to do with this, and you remember the girls yesterday talking about a strange man on the bus, with the empty and snowy atmosphere shifting from serene to sinister as you walk through a narrow and foreboding street where you eventually make your way to the bus stop. You're now on the bus and things are pretty uneventful for the most part, with it driving through the snowy expanse and occasionally stopping to pick up a passenger. But things are pretty normal until the passenger begins to turn around and stare at you, with your heartbeat being able to be heard during this, showing the stressful impact of all of the stalking has had on your character, as both you and her are now suspicious of everyone due to the stalker's identity still being largely shrouded in mystery, and not knowing whether he could be working alone. Anyway, you eventually get off the bus, which just so happens to drop you off right outside of the coffee shop, and so you enter and go to speak to your boss, but he's not in the office or in the back room, but strangely his car is still parked outside, and so you go to check the bathroom. Oh my god, not again! Why are the bosses in these games just insistent on being as unhelpful as possible? Anyway, he then quickly leaves as you start your shift. You head back into the store where you see a strange man sat at a table watching you, as you then recognise this man to be eerily similar to the man on the security camera the night before, and the man who had lost his phone at the start of the game. And in this moment of pure terror, you realise that this man is the stalker. This moment of realisation is nothing short of petrifying, as you feel almost paralysed with fear that this person who has been after you for so long is now mere meters away from you. Despite this though, you still have a drive-through customer to attend to, meaning your back is turned to the stalker the whole time you prepare the order, making you worry what he could be doing and what he might do once the driver leaves. After completing his order though, you're not alone for too long as a woman enters, yet the stalker's eyes are still fixated on you until he then leaves to go to the bathroom. Anyway, you speak to the customer where she gives you a rosary bracelet, which is said to ward off evil. If only she knew that your stalker was literally just here. Anyway, you then quickly finish your order and she leaves. And then the customer after this, I don't even know how to describe. A shirtless dancing man appears for some fucking reason. You begin to argue with him to try to get him to leave the store. And just like that, your shift is over and you're once again plunged into the unsettling emptiness of closing the store. And so you take out the trash, yet once again the door to the back is open, and you go to clean the toilet, but it's empty with the stalker being nowhere to be found. And so you begin cleaning it and then go to head home. Until then, the power shuts off once again and an ominous red light fills the room as a countdown begins, and threatening burglars appear who constantly order drinks as you frantically make them, with more and more orders piling up. More drinks, more coffee, more orders, as the time ticks away, your anxiety growing trying to complete them all in time, yet then the timer ends, although upon further inspection it looks almost like an alarm clock. You head to the breaker to turn back on the lights, but it doesn't work, as you then try to open the locked door. You jolt awake as it takes you into the final night, with all of that presumably being a nightmare, although it's unclear whether that whole night was meant to be a dream or just the final part of it. However, we can see the extreme toll that this is having on our character, where the coffee shop becomes a place of such extreme horrors, and how that man is stalking her even in her dreams, and with the whole snow and bus sequences being a perfect example of how the game uses isolation as a tool for horror, as whilst there is life present in the form of buildings and apartments, the very fact that you're the only person outside makes you feel more alone, and there's a really liminal and uncanny emptiness to this part of the game. However, there's still so much more horrors to uncover as you enter the final shift of the game. It begins again from the perspective of the stalker, staring at you through the drive-thru window without you knowing, making you fear what moment in the game this might have happened at, as it then goes to you in your apartment, where you leave like usual and head out into the night where the snow is mostly melted into small piles, as you then make your way to the car with the same van of the stalker still being there, as you then head to the coffee shop and speak to your boss, except this time he's nowhere to be found and not even in the bathroom like last time, and so you begin the shift by yourself, concerned with where he might be, as you then see your first customer, that being the private investigator from the first shift. He says that the police won't help, and instead will just brush it off to lessen the workload, where he says that he'll take a look around and investigate, and you learn that our character called him to put an end to the stalking, and so you begin to serve the next customer until they ask if there's a photo shoot in the store today, where you say you don't think so, and she responds, "What? But I saw someone outside taking pictures." You question further and you learn that the photos was of the store and of you, and in this moment of terror you realise that the stalker is here, but luckily you still have the private investigator, and so hopefully tonight can be the night he's finally brought to justice, and this can all be over. You then give them their drinks and begin serving more customers later into the night, yet the whole time you're constantly checking to see where the stalker might be, and if you're in danger, and after serving another customer she asks if anyone's repairing the antenna. You say no, but then she says that she saw someone on the roof. However, you assume it to just be the investigator and decide to check it out as soon as you can. And just like that, your shift is over. And so you go to grab a ladder from the back room and exit the store with it to climb up on the roof. You make it to the roof and it's extremely empty and devoid of anything, except for a small hatch where you can climb into and enter, where you see what looks like the living space of someone with a small makeshift bed and cartons of milk, as you realise that this room is the same one you saw in the cutscene earlier, and that this is what was in the back room of the store. Panic consumes you as you realise that this is where the stalker was hiding the whole time, and so you go to close the store as soon as possible to get out of here, where you tensely do your remaining chores, and with the investigator being nowhere to be found, you feel extremely vulnerable due to being alone with the stalker, as you then go to close the store. The stalker appears, clinging to the door to try to get it open, and in this moment you feel such petrifying fear as he watches you intensely, yet when you grab your phone, it's gone, meaning you can't call for help, and worse yet, the stalker is nowhere to be seen, and so you go to run to your car. Whilst not as impactful as jump scares in other games, this still is really scary, and the death goes on for a long and agonising amount of time, which shows just how deranged and horrifying this stalker is. To actually survive though, you frantically grab the ladder and head into the back room to find a way out, where you eventually use it to get onto the roof, where you can grab a brick. However, upon looking to the ground you see the investigator lying bleeding out on the snow, most likely being killed by the stalker, where you then see the stalker below you and decide to drop a brick on him to end this nightmare once and for all. In the epilogue text afterwards, we learn how conflicted she feels about taking a life, and how terrifying the man was, saying that after she ran to the police and told them everything, they went back to the coffee shop but the man was no longer there. However, they said they would still investigate the rest, and she takes solace in the fact that this is finally over, and begins to rest peacefully at home. Wait, why is there more gameplay? You're back in your apartment watching TV, but when looking for your phone you can't find it, and so you go to the balcony where you can hear it ringing below you, and so for one final time you leave your apartment and make the treacherous journey through the eerie and empty city to retrieve your phone, still with the lingering fear that the stalker was never found, where you then retrieve it and things are peaceful with nothing happening as you return back to your apartment. And that is the closing shift. What makes this game so unique is how immersive it is in putting you in the perspective of the character, and by seeing her day-to-day life and being in the monotony of day-to-day work, it makes those moments of horror hit much harder, as you feel that horror as though you are her. This is a game that also goes against the conventions of earlier Chilla Art games, by having no supernatural elements, where the horror instead comes from the realism of it, and so the more immersed you are in that realism and in the very real threat of being stalked, the more perturbing the game is to play. Compared to Chilla Art's previous games, we can see a clear improvement in stuff like the story and the gameplay, as mechanics like making the coffee are more enjoyable than the gameplay in previous games, where they were mostly story and horror focused. Then in terms of horror, I would say this game is fairly scary, and evokes a lot of the same feelings as in the convenience store, where not only is the structure of the game so similar to each other, but also that idea of finding horror in everyday locations that are supposed to be safe. You've probably been to a convenience store or been to a coffee shop, and hopefully it's been pretty uneventful, and so by taking a place you associate with safety and making it dangerous, it makes all of the horror hit even harder. But there's also another aspect to the horror horror of these games that makes these games even more frightening, and that's just how real the threat of stalking is in real life. In Japan and most of the world, stalking is an extremely big and extremely dangerous issue, and is something that disproportionately affects women, with more than 1 in 6 women being stalked at some point in their lifetimes. And according to data from 2018 in Japan, almost 90% of stalking victims were women, and so this is a very real and very serious threat in society, and this is exactly what we see in the closing shift, where throughout the game you see countless people talk about the large amount of stalking that's happening, and how little is being done about it. And so part of what makes this game so scary is that what's happening here isn't something exaggerated or fantastical like you see in other horror games, but instead something that can and has happened before in real life. Now, I often think equating real-world serious issues to fictional stories always seems a bit in poor taste, since the last thing that should be done is to glorify and make light of situations that have affected real victims. However, I feel the way in which Chilla Art handles these issues does a great job at raising awareness of them in a respectful way, as throughout the game we see how unseriously the stalking is taken by those in positions of power, and sadly if they did, it wouldn't have ended so badly, as they would have been able to stop the stalker before things got too bad. And I think by having that disturbing ending of the stalker being in her closet acts more as a message to us, the audience, that if we want to truly be rid of him and other people like him, then we need to be the ones to act and make changes in society, and shows how ineffective things are now, where sadly stalking incidents like this can happen, as in 2024 stalking rates in Japan hit record highs. And so I think it's good how Chilla Art doesn't shy away from raising awareness for issues like this in society. We can also see this in some of their other games, where a large amount of them highlight serious issues, like in the game The Karaoke, which I didn't cover here because I thought the themes were just too heavy, as it tackles with themes of SA and abuse from those in positions of power, or in Missing Children, where your character isn't taken as seriously just because she's a woman, which all highlights how Chilla Art uses horror as a means to illuminate parts of our society that are extremely bad, and how we can be the ones to change that. I don't think that there's a game of theirs that's more relevant to the modern day now than their game Parasocial. Parasocial is one of Chilla Art's most recent games to release, with it releasing just over a year after the closing shift in August of 2023, and is in my opinion the culmination of every skill Chilla Art has built over their vast library of games, and shows a unique horror style that's scarily relevant to life today. For those that don't know, parasociality is the idea of having a one-sided relationship with a celebrity or influencer that has no idea of your existence, and is something really relevant to today, where online influencers make it so easy to build parasocial relationships because of how easy they are to interact with, and to certain types of people, this relationship between viewer and creator can turn from one of a fan to one of thinking you're actually friends with them, and to the wrong person it can lead to some horrifying stuff. And in this game he plays a streamer who gets stalked by a parasocial fan, and it's extremely disturbing. From an interview I found with Chilla Art about this game, they said they were inspired by a recent event involving a streamer and a parasocial fan, and views this sort of thing as unique to the modern day, and thought it would be interesting to make a game about that, and that it would be easy to get into that worldview. I think all of this will be evident once we dive into Chilla Art's most petrifying game. It opens with you waking up at 7:30 PM to begin streaming, as you play as Semranina, a VTuber who lives alone in her apartment and likes to stream games to her audience. I think this is actually the first game I'm covering in this video where the main character actually has a name, which is nice. Anyway, you get a text from a friend and check your phone to find a text message from none other than Chilla's Coffee. Oh god, not again. You also find a text message from presumably an ex-boyfriend, and a discouraging text from your mother about streaming, but also one from a friend who had left food for you, and so you eat it and then head to begin your streaming. You have to do some basic setup like setting up your VTuber model and using your camera for tracking, and begin to load up the game and the streaming software to begin your stream. The game you're playing here is Akamanto, which is actually a real game that you can play in real life, with it being a PuppetCombo-esque low-poly horror game that features you being chased by the titular Akamanto, and was Chilla Art's second game to ever release. I think that's cool that they reference their old work and some of their best stuff yet. Anyway, your stream is fairly generic as you play the game, with the occasional chatter coming in to talk like Lone or I Love Nina, who cheer you on as you play the game more. Until then, you fail miserably at the game, and so you ask for some recommendations, where a chatter sends you a link to a different game called Horror Game Only for Semranina, with a website that looks not at all sketchy in the slightest. Surely we wouldn't actually download— oh my god, we have to download it. You launch the game and you're in a dingy looking apartment with trash bags everywhere, and a general sense of decay and unease, with a room featuring a similar setup to yours, yet the monitors contain only static. However, not much happens besides you finding 4 numbers to enter a code to unlock a door, and so you enter the code. Suddenly your chat begins freaking out, with all of them talking about your face. But you have a VTuber avatar, right? You look in horror as you see the avatar has been disabled, now showing the webcam pointed at your face. And so panicked, you end the stream. Something seems off about this though. I don't think it's a coincidence that as soon as she installs a game by a fan literally called I Love Nina, her stream just so happens to stop showing her as a VTuber and show her face, as you wonder who this mystery person could be. But what's even more unsettling is how when you check your phone after the stream, you get a text message from an unknown number saying, "Keep streaming the
game I sent, otherwise bad things happen.
Making it even scarier with the thought that this person also knows your phone number. And so unsure what to do, you text your friend Asuka about everything that's happened. But she's busy and can't respond, but promises to come round and talk to her tomorrow. But just as that happens, your doorbell rings. However, upon looking through the peephole, no one's there. But when checking the letterbox, you get a note saying,
I'm always watching over you.
and this immediately fills you with dread, as now whoever this stalker fan is, they know where you live and creates a similar sort of feeling as in the closing shift, when now you're unsafe in your own home. You wake up asleep at your desk after completing a virus scan and making your computer safe, and it's now early morning where you're supposed to take out the trash, and so you do, and along the way you familiarise yourself with your apartment and its surroundings being a high-rise building not too dissimilar to the apartments in the closing shift, where again there's that sense of emptiness as you wander along the balcony where you also see the apartment next to yours is under renovation. As you then make it to the elevator. Boy, do I love this game's realistic simulation of elevators. Anyway, after making it to the bottom, you leave your building where you meet a police officer. He says he's volunteering to pick up trash and asks if you live alone and warns you to stay careful since anything could happen, and especially to girls like her, and says if anything happens to head to his station nearby. After this, you continue down a not at all sketchy looking alleyway and make it to the dumpster. Yet near it is probably the strangest person I've seen in one of these games, who just stares at you, unblinking, unmoving, just watching, and it's genuinely so fucking uncomfortable to look at, as you can even hear his heavy breathing. Could this be the person who made the game for you? Well, after this, you watch him disappear behind the building and head back to your apartment where you met with your friend Asuka. She seems really concerned about how you're doing, and decides to take you somewhere. Oh god, is this where I think it is? What's so scary about seeing this though is that from playing the closing shift, you know that this takes place in the same world as it, and in the closing shift the threat of stalking is extremely prevalent, and so adds an extra layer of fear as you know what these stalkers are capable of, and dread what might happen with the person stalking you. After ordering your drinks, you look around the coffee shop, with most people being pretty typical except for a hooded and mysterious man sitting at the back by himself silently, with no drink or food, and you get the sense that he's not here for the best reasons. After getting your order though, you sit down and begin to eat, but as you do, you see a strange man in a black coat enter the shop whilst your friend speaks to you about the situation, and determines it was the game that caused her face to show up. But as you were talking about receiving strange messages, the man in the coat approaches your table and stares directly at you, only to then sit right next to you. And whilst this may just be an ordinary customer, something about him seems so strange, yet given how many creepy people you've seen today, maybe he's not that important after all. Anyway, your friend suggests to keep playing the games instead of ignoring the messages, as you then notice on the phone of the man is a VTuber, your VTuber. After reassuring some of your worries, Asuka then asks about why she broke up with her ex-boyfriend, where Nina says that they just won a good match. And once again the man stands up and stares at you, yet when you tell your friend, he quickly leaves. One of the best aspects of this opening is how quickly it gets you into the horror, as in games like the convenience store or the closing shift at the start is pretty uneventful, with each night getting progressively creepier until you reach a point of no return. Yet with this game it just straps you right in and already puts you past that point of no return, as the stalker is already after you from the get-go. After this, your friend drops you off at your apartment as you then go in the elevator. You watch in horror as the same creepy man from the cafe enters with you, yet the whole ride he faces away from you, not allowing you to see his face, and so you exit the elevator and you anxiously walk back to your apartment, as he stays in the elevator, but now you're filled with immense fear knowing that he knows what floor your apartment's on. You then start streaming the game from yesterday where you're in a new level, this time featuring a series of maze-like alleyways, and unsurprisingly in your chat is I Love Nina, although the game's quite boring and uneventful, where you basically just have to avoid a police officer whilst you gather a weird ghostly girl and bring her to a red door which unlocks it. Although whilst playing you see a message in chat from the same person who made the game saying,
I go to Chilla's coffee too.
As you realise that the stalker in chat is the exact same as the stalker in real life, and from here the game only gets even more disturbing. After a long day of coffee and streaming, you decide to take a relaxing bath to calm your nerves, yet you notice that the door to your balcony is left wide open. Did someone come in while you were streaming? Panic consumes you as you nervously check all around the house until then. Nah, I'm just fucking with you, there's nothing there. Wait, is that a YouTube subscribe button? Oh god, the only way to make this go away is by pressing it. You get in the bath and reflect on the events that has happened, yet this is far from relaxing as you're left with the eerie silence of your bathroom until then. The door to your bathroom opens, making you fear what's going on. What makes this moment so particularly terrifying is just how vulnerable and exposed you are in this situation, as you're naked in a bath with what's most definitely a deranged stalker who's infatuated with you, and so having that moment of the door opening is just a feeling that's so disturbingly violating, and is genuinely one of the most unsettling things I've ever seen in a horror game, as the fear of what might happen is one that's so horrifyingly real and hard to stomach, with this even deeply affecting our protagonist as she struggles to sleep for the rest of the night and plays it off as a psychic encounter. You also get a note from the building manager, and so you call him and tell him your room number and ask about the history of the property, yet he says there's no history of paranormal activity as it's not a stigmatized property, but also mentions that they offer stalking consultation, where after this you begin streaming again. The game is different once again, this time being in a new level inside a convenience store, with a strange low poly environment with a strange maze of shelves until you get a message in chat.
Did you enjoy your bath yesterday?
Absolute terror consumes you as you realise that he was the one that opened the door. As if he's willing to do that, then just what other horrendous things would he be willing to do? Anyway, you then find the same girls in the previous game. Before then, your TV suddenly turns on, and whilst this could be played off as nothing special, it seems more like the stalker toying with you, letting you know that he's always watching. You complete the level and end stream, with your TV remote now missing and your fridge empty, but what's even worse about the remote is that it means the stalker must be close enough to your apartment in order for it to work on the TV. You decide to order Uber Eats for dinner, and also see a bouquet of flowers left in your mailbox as your doorbell then rings, showing the most perturbing delivery driver I've ever seen. Yet he acts strange, and doesn't have your order, and worse yet, he's a fan of your streams, and runs off strangely, seemingly pretending to be a delivery driver just to meet you, and so you nervously have to go to the grocery store. When you leave though, you see a person smoking on the balcony who turns out to be the building manager, and seems to know who you are and talks strangely about you living alone and about having a boyfriend, where he says he gets the feeling you were with someone until recently, and begins to ask really invasive questions about why you broke up, and even though he's supposed to be the manager, you get a really strange feeling from him. After this, you walk down a dark and long creepy alleyway completely alone, as you worry if the stalker could be nearby. However, luckily the grocery store isn't too far away from your apartment, and after almost getting hit by a car, you then enter. Your character thinks to herself about buying food and alcohol, yet the whole time you notice the store clerk staring at you intensely no matter where in the store you go, as you go around gathering the stuff you need, yet the whole time you feel really creeped out by the people in there, until you notice something. A man in a hoodie enter, and behind him, your stalker, stood outside the store, watching you. Yet somehow your character doesn't seem to notice, and you're filled with immense dread not wanting to leave the store, until then you finally check out and go to leave, but then it's your ex-boyfriend, and he says he has something to tell you, that your friend is acting suspicious and tells you to unblock him so he can send evidence, where after this you then leave the store only to see that the stalker is gone, until you go to cross the road. You watch in pure terror as he begins to follow you across the street, yet maintaining just a big enough distance to seem inconspicuous. But as you enter the dark alleyway, you're filled with immense distress as you worry what he might do, as he begins to follow you all the way home, with you constantly turning round to see him following behind you, until you then go to enter your apartment and he runs off into another part of the building, as you're relieved knowing he's gone for now as you then enter the elevator. He gets into the elevator with you as he lingers there silently and not moving, as he feels so frightened, as on one hand you need to get to your apartment to be safe, but in doing so you'd be risking him following you further, and as you get off the elevator he does too once you walk far enough away, and stays at the end of the balcony, still watching. What makes this part so incredibly disturbing to play through is how it utilises red herring characters to build up that sense of paranoia and dread, as from the very start of this sequence you have so many creepy characters like the Uber driver, building manager, store employee, the other shoppers, and even your ex-boyfriend, all making this one simple task of eating dinner something that's so frightening and uncomfortable, with all of these people having a strange and ominous aura to them that makes you wonder if they are the true identity of the stalker, and makes the reveal of the stalker far more distressing as it pays off all of that dread and paranoia the game has so massively built up to this point. After getting back into your apartment, you frantically text your friend where you say about calling the police, but she dismisses it, saying the police won't care without evidence, but she still recommends to consult with them and suggests visiting the police box in the morning. But worse yet is that she's away for the next few days, meaning no one's able to help you right now. Yet right after this you get a text from an unknown person asking you if you can trust what Asuka said, and talks about what your ex said earlier, and says it's good to get allies before ending it with,
"You are all mine."
And this is probably the creepiest text message in the game, and so desperate for answers, you unblock Rukia. He mentions how he watched your stream and saw her get hacked, and believes that Asuka has something to do with it and sends you this photo. where you see her interacting with the stalker, as he says that Asuka is the only other person who can enter the apartment, and you're left in shock now not being able to trust the person you thought was your closest friend, and so you block her. Until you then hear a strange static noise coming from your computer, and upon investigating you see a VTuber on the screen saying how you were abandoned by your friend, and will be forever alone just like them, living in darkness with no one to come and save them until then. Everything shuts off as you hear what sounds like knocking on the window, and so you go to the curtain to investigate. As you see the stalker at the window, fear consumes you where you then leave the room until suddenly you watch as the back door opens, but worse yet is how your door is locked, and then the stalker enters, but what's so strange is how on your phone you can read the live chat giving you guidance on how to survive as though this is a game. Now from here what you're supposed to do is carefully navigate your way around the apartment to avoid getting caught by the intruder, with it feeling so tense and fear-inducing as you eventually find yourself a screwdriver and approach the intruder. As you gaze in horror at his lifeless corpse until you then head to the door. Oh thank god it was just a nightmare. Whilst not real, this part shows us just how much of a toll this is taking on Nina, making her so fearful to be in her own home, and what's presumably meant to be a representation of her friend betraying her, highlighting just how scary and anxiety-inducing it is to worry about being stalked. Anyway, you then leave to your apartment and head to the police box to consult on the stalking, and the walk there is layered with the fear that you'll see the stalker again, yet luckily you don't and you speak with the police officer in the park. He goes through everything you've told him but says without evidence there's not much they can do, and if it happens again to get in touch with him directly as calling the police would take too long, and he seems really reassuring and gives you a tiny bit of safety. Yet you know that the only way to resolve this once and for all is to get proof, and to get that it means you'll have to see the stalker again. It's now late at night, and you're walking back to your apartment, yet the whole time it feels so eerie and menacing, as though the stalker could reappear again, and your character feels this too, talking about feeling so scared, and you debate on whether or not to call Asuka, even though you know she's against you, although do you really believe Rukia, who was once blocked over Asuka? However, you decide against calling her and stream instead. You're now in the next level of the game. Hang on, this environment looks way different to anything else. Wait a minute, this looks oddly familiar, oh my god. And in this moment of sheer dread and panic, you realise that this is the grocery store from real life. The same store that the stalker followed you home from. And sure enough, you enter the alleyway with it being the exact same as in real life. You carry on petrified until you reach the end as Nina also realises this is the entrance to her apartment. As you see, I love Nina in chat saying, "What's wrong?" As people in chat also realise her fear and panic, and what's so scary about this is now not only does the stalker know where she lives, but all of her stream does as well. Yet due to the threat of the stalker, you have to keep proceeding. You go into the elevator and make it to the top floor, and sure enough it's the exact same, as you then enter your apartment with it being disgustingly accurate to real life, suggesting all sorts of messed up ideas before then. She decides to end stream early due to feeling incredibly sick until then a video opens. You see a recording of Nina at her desk, then her in the bath and even her sleeping, with this being just so sickening and violating as you realise just how much the stalker has been watching you, and you feel so powerless as you think back to all the small seemingly insignificant occurrences, and realising that this stalker has been watching you since the very moment the game began. After this you call the police, now with solid evidence that will surely be enough to end this for good, as you tell him you need help and he says he'll be right over, and knowing you're not safe you have to hide until help arrives, terrified at the thought of what the stalker might do to you. Suddenly, the stalker texts you saying he'll be over to see you in 1 minute, and so petrified you find the nearest weapon and hide in the closet, as the clock ticks down more and more until then your phone dies as the door unlocks and you stay still in fear as you then venture out the closet. He stops you and says how pointless everything you've done has been. You're laying on the floor with a ringing in your ear as you see the stalker leaning over you, until the police and another man enters where the stalker runs off, with them chasing him as another man then comes forward to pick you up. It then jumps forward to an epilogue where you learn it was Rukia, her ex-boyfriend, who saved her, and the police said the stalker was a crazed fan who watched her daily and fell under the illusion that she was his girlfriend, before then saying,
"The act of misconstruing your relationship with an online media personality and being under the illusion you're in an intimate relationship is called parasocial."
And her case of this is far from being the only one. And after Rukia helped her so much, she decides to go out with him again, where it then cuts to you with him at Chilla's coffee. Wait, why is the game not over yet? You see Asuka enter and she apologises for how she acted before she then shows you a photo. where you see Rukiya giving an envelope to the stalker, and this is the game's bad ending. But to fully understand what this exactly means, we have to look at the game's true ending. Now, for the sake of time, the start of this ending is largely the same as in the bad ending, where you unblock Asuka and invite her over, and you learn that the photo of her and the stalker was staged, and it seems that Rukiya plays a far larger role in this whole thing than you once thought. Yet nonetheless, she leaves your apartment midway through streaming, and so she doesn't see the game or the creepy videos, and so now instead of calling the police, you call Asuka instead. But when you do, you hear it from the balcony, and so you go to investigate, where you now gain access to the balcony next door and into the other apartment. You see a computer with 3 monitors all playing the series of creepy videos of you, yet the rest of it seems largely empty and devoid of life before then. You see a board with a series of photos of you in various locations, like the store, the coffee shop, and most disgustingly of all, your bathroom, with this showing you just how depraved and horrible the stalker is. Panicked, you go to check the bathroom, and see Asuka tied up in the bath. However, instead of letting you free her, she tells you to run to the police before he can catch her. And sure enough, the person after you now is Rukiya. However, if you actually want to live, you sneak through your apartment with the stalker not noticing you as you make it to the corridor and then run like your life depends on it. As you then get in the elevator, only to be hassled by the building manager when you get to the bottom, who for some reason can also grab you if you answer incorrectly. And so you run instead and make it onto the street, where then a police officer stops you, and so desperate for relief from this nightmare, you talk to him. God fucking damn it! This time you run from the police officer, pure terror consuming you with him chasing you close behind. It then cuts to a news report where you learn that 4 people have been arrested. Rukiya, his mother the building manager, his younger brother who dressed as a police officer, and the stalker himself. And over the course of the report you learn that Rukiya was the main one stalking you the whole time. However, you're filled with immense relief knowing that this nightmare is now finally over once and for all. And so you end it off with one last chat with Asuka, where you reflect on everything that's happened and decide to move out, before she then recommends a game to you, the convenience store. Oh god, I can't escape it! And that is Parasocial. This game is by far one of the best and most polished experiences by Chilla Art, and doubles down on this realistic style of horror way more than the closing shift, by having the stalker be way more of a present threat throughout, and having him be far more active in his attempts to pursue you. As in the closing shift, the stalker, while still horrible, he stays mostly out of sight, not wanting to be seen by you whilst he takes photos and watches you. And whilst the stalker in Parasocial also does this to some extent, he's far more present and wants you to know you're being stalked. He gets uncomfortably close to you, he follows you home, he breaks into your apartment, and he constantly lets you know that you're being stalked. And I think this is far scarier than the closing shift, as from the get-go you know that you're being stalked, and the rest of the game is more about trying to survive and solve the mystery of who's behind it all, whilst the closing shift is far slower in its delivery of horror. Compared to other games like the convenience store and Okaeri, I would say I really prefer the more realistic approach to horror, as it makes the game far scarier, and whilst the supernatural elements of horror are interesting and do have their own fear factor to them, I think the very notion that these things can happen to you in real life as they've happened to so many before, makes them more realistic games so much scarier for that reason. The ending of the ex-boyfriend being behind it all is also not too uncommon, as the most common relationship between victim and stalker were boyfriend and girlfriend, including former partners like we see here in Parasocial, and the fact that situations like this isn't that uncommon makes the whole thing even more horrific. So by going over 5 of Chilla Art's most captivating horror games, you can see how their style developed over time, from being rooted in supernatural and emotional horror yet with a touch of realism to them, to then diving fully into serious real-world issues and using it to highlight how stuff like that isn't taken nearly as seriously, and could be better prevented if people were more educated and took reports of it more seriously. However, the horror in every Chilla Art game is designed to test you and intentionally made to disturb you and make you uncomfortable, from the death of the mother and main character in Okaeri, where it doesn't shy away from showing you it and forcing you to orchestrate your own death, to then in the convenience store where the spooky events are only a way of showing the events of a horrific murder that occurred, then in Missing Children where it's presented as a supernatural mystery, yet in reality is about a grief-struck mother desperately trying to stop others from taking their own lives too, and then Closing Shift and Parasocial, which highlight the devastating and disturbing impacts that stalking can have, with it not shying away from making you uncomfortable. For my rankings of these games, I would have to say 5 would be Missing Children, as whilst it is interesting narratively, there wasn't much in terms of horror or gameplay, whilst 4th would be Okaeri due to it being a really scary experience but too short. Then for third, I would say Parasocials. Whilst it was the most polished, I felt I enjoyed the other games more, with second being the convenience store and first being the closing shift, due to how well they create a sense of terror and slow burn horror. Also, here's my rankings on what games scared me the most. However, I think by all of these games being so grounded in realism in this way, regardless of whether it has supernatural elements or not, is a huge strength of its horror, because all of these events are not uncommon to hear about, or even experience yourself in real life. And whilst other games try to imagine horrific scenarios to place you in, it's still not as grounded in reality. And so after playing the game, that horror and that fear you felt doesn't stick with you as much. Yet with Chilla's Art games, by being so real, that fear begins to linger with you far after you close the game. That gut-wrenching, dreadful fear that one day this could happen to you too. So that was a pretty morbid ending. You'll probably be fine, just make sure to stay safe and take care of yourselves. If you thought this video was good, then please could you hype it to show that to YouTube and help me out so much. Or if you want to see more like this, then you can watch this video where I dive into all 5 episodes of the Fears to Fathom series, a series which both inspired and was inspired by the works of Chilla's Art, and features the same realistic horror style. Or if you're feeling more retro, then why not watch my video essay on PuppetCombo, the grandfather of retro VHS horror games, who inspired both Chilla's Art and Fears to Fathom in the first place, and is a really thrilling watch. Also, huge thanks to my channel members like Itch Rose for supporting the channel, and also if you haven't subscribed then please do, as it helps me out a lot and you'll get to see when I post more videos. Anyway, thanks for watching.